I once heard a discussion on public radio about different theories of education. And during the call-in period, one caller focused on the importance of training people to think and reason critically, not to just take things at face value, think them through. It was noted that some people tend to think and reason more concretely, and some more abstractly. I'm kind of a concrete thinker myself. How about you? Well, it seems that Jesus, being the good teacher that he was, understood this, though it probably wasn't a formulated theory at his time. In his parables and in his teaching about the gospel, he draws from images that are common to people's experience in nature and otherwise familiar things. And he moves the hearers beyond that image or that story to something more abstract. Faith, for example, or matters of faith. Hence we have the image of the mustard seed for us concrete thinkers. And everybody else too. The idea being that it's so important for us to understand we need to have some way. Were he living today in terms of his ministry, although he is certainly risen, he would use perhaps a different image that he at that time would not have had any concept of. For example, if you had faith the size of a computer chip in your iPhone, you could do great things. And it's actually a pretty good image, because that little chip is tiny, but just look what it does or is capable of doing if given the right commands and so forth and so on, far beyond anything that I understand. But the idea, again, is simple. It's the same thing, that we need some kind of image to help us understand the things of faith. The mustard seed in this imagery has potential. It's just a seed. It must be brought to actuality by careful planting and tending. There's a difference between what is potential and what is actual. Here's a story. A 6th grade teacher who gave her students an assignment in abstract thinking found one of her students going home and asking his mother this homework question: what is the difference between potential and actual? Mom thought for a while, and then she replied, "Go ask your dad and your sister and your brother. What would they do if they found $1 million and nobody knew they had it? Would they turn it in, or would they keep it?" The boy went first to his older brother with the question. "Are you kidding?" the brother replied. "That would pay for college and set me up in a business, and it's probably drug money anyway. Of course I would keep it." Well, the boy wrote down his answer and went to his sister. "Of course I'd keep it, silly. It's probably a bribe or a payoff that got lost anyway. I would shop till I drop, and then I'd bank the rest, and I'd be set for life." How many of you confirmands would do that one? Hopefully not too many. Hopefully none. But the student wrote down the answer and went to Dad. "Well, anybody who loses $1 million can probably afford it. I'd remodel the house and put you kids through school, and then have something left for retirement." Well, the student went back to Mom with all of the answers. Mom said, and moms are really wise, "Now do you see the difference between potential and actual?" Well, the boy was rather puzzled. So Mom explained, "Potentially, we are an honest family. But actually, you and I live with 3 conniving thieves. Well, a parable of sorts. So let's turn to the gospel. But remember, potential and actual, really important. Jesus speaks about faith. It's an abstract concept. He speaks about it as potential and actual. The disciples ask for an increase of faith. That is a request that comes at the end of a long journey narrative where Jesus has been instructing his disciples about what it really means to follow him. And they're finding out that the demands are piling up. In the preceding 4 verses of Luke 17, Jesus warns the disciples about giving scandal and causing others to stumble spiritually, and they're urged to correct those who sin and be willing to forgive repeatedly. It's then that the disciples apparently realize that there are heavy demands placed upon those who decide to follow Jesus, to be his disciples. Hence, their request, increase our faith. We need more of it. So in response, Jesus talks about the potential of even the smallest, most minute amount of faith, if you can quantify such. If you had faith the size of that mustard seed, the tiniest of seeds, you would say to the mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted into the sea, and it would obey you. In other words, he's saying to his disciples, if you really live the faith you've been given, however great or small it might be, you could expect great things to happen. Great things would happen. So the obvious question, I think, for each of us in the gospel today is, am I living up to the potential of the faith I've been given? Our young 6th grader learned our potential is realized only if we actually live what we profess to believe and put it into action. So we might say with those disciples on our journey of faith, increase our faith. Then Jesus offers a very brief parable. And as is always the case with his parables, we are to recognize ourselves as part of the story. They're like a mirror. There should be a point in a parable when we say, oh, he's talking to me, about us. Great things can be accomplished even with a tiny amount of faith. But Jesus cautioned his hearers in this parable not to think that by living their faith they're doing something heroic. The parable is about the master and the servant. God is the master, we are the servants. But in this parable, we're asked to think about identifying with the master, with God. It's a hypothetical situation that Jesus presents. If you have a servant and he goes out doing his job, plowing the field or tending the sheep in the field, and comes back, he shouldn't expect to be fed. He should be waiting on you because he's the servant. So we can perhaps maybe imagine our own circumstance. For example, suppose you hired someone to design and carry out a new landscaping concept for your home. Of course, you would pay the hired workers, but would you also be expected to feed them dinner and be effusive in your thanks? You can feed them dinner if you want, and you can be effusive if you want, but you're not expected to do so. They're doing what they had agreed upon, and they're being paid what you agreed to pay them. They fulfilled their part of the contract, you fulfilled yours. So from this parable, Jesus draws the conclusion, when you have done all that you have been commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have only done what we were obliged to do. It sounds kind of like a put down, doesn't it? But I don't think it is. It's really a lesson about gospel humility. One who has been given the gift of faith is expected to live it out. Pure and simple. And you who are approaching the sacrament of confirmation should hear this particularly. In doing that, in living out your faith, you're not doing something heroic, but you're doing what is expected of somebody who's been given a great, wonderful, powerful gift, even if it's only the size of that mustard seed or computer chip, as it were. Part of the idea here is that faith is very, very fragile. It's a gift. It can be lost really, really easily if it's not practiced, if it's not lived. This whole concept, I think, is supported by our second reading from 2 Timothy, in which Paul says something about our being gifted. Beloved, he says, I remind you to stir into flame the gift of God that you have. Stir it into flame. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather of power and self-control. Bear your share of the hardship of the gospel with the strength that comes from God. In other words, you've been given a great gift. Stir it into flame. It's not easy living. It's a hard way of life. But you're not doing it on your own. Paul exhorts us to live the faith that we have been given with courage, conviction, even when it's really hard. Our little sixth grader learned that our potential is actualized only if we live the principles and beliefs we utter in our prayers and in our creeds. And in just a moment, these young people are going to be asked to renew their baptismal vows, and we're all going to do the same. It should be taken really, really seriously. Faith begins with the gratitude and the humility of the servant in today's gospel. We're challenged to understand the gift of faith, that it requires justice, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, loving one another as we have been loved. So a good question for all of us today, given that my faith gives me great potential, how well am I actualizing it by the way I live?